Good evening and welcome to UK Crime Book Club. This evening I'm delighted to be joined by Jane Thynne, who is it Thynne?
It's Thynne, actually.
Thynne. Sorry, I'll get it right. Thynne. And Jane is going to be talking about
anything, Karen. I've got so used to it.
Jane is going to be talking about her book, An Appointment in Paris. And probably best to start with you, Jane, and to introduce yourself and your books.
Hello, everybody. I am a crime writer, but I'm also a historical fiction writer, and I've written 2 alternative histories too. So I kind of spread myself over a gamut of different genres, but largely I write about things that happened in the 20th century. And Appointment in Paris is a new series. It's the second in a new series. My first series revolved around an Anglo-German actress called Clara Vine, who goes and lives in Berlin and during the rise of the Nazis and then through the war. So the Clara Vine, there were 6 in the Clara Vine series, and I really wanted a close-up look at what life was like for women, particularly in Germany during the war. So that series, as I say, it's got 6 books in it. And then I thought, actually, I'd like to do a different series, which particularly was looking at Britain as well during the pre-war and the wartime. And so I came up with a mismatched detective duo called Harry Fox and Stella Fry. And this is their second outing in Appointment in Paris. And perhaps unsurprisingly, Stella goes to Paris in this book, and Harry stays at home. But there's a fascinating real life story behind it, which I feel you're going to ask me about, aren't you, Karen?
I am going to ask you about it, yeah.
It's a story that this is true of all writers, actually, that you come across something and it marinates in your mind and you think, one day I'm going to write that. I'm going to write something about this. And this happened to me, and I came across the story of Trent Park. And everybody's heard of Bletchley Park, but Trent Park is the Bletchley Park that nobody really has heard of, or not many people. And what it is a very beautiful, stately home north of London, and it was owned by a man called Sir Philip Sassoon, who was a rich socialite and an MP, and he had it beautifully decorated with murals by Whistler and gorgeous chinoiserie and lovely furniture. But then in 1933, just before war broke out, he died, and he left it to the nation. And it was decided it would be kept as a holding camp for captured German and Italian prisoners. But nothing would be changed. It would stay in its beautiful and luxurious state, and they would put the prisoners there. What the prisoners didn't know was that every inch of this lovely home and grounds was bugged. It was wired by brilliant people from the Post Office Research Department who put bugs in every painting, every vase, the skirting boards, the light fittings, the trees in the garden. They were all wired for sound. So when the Germans and also the Italians were moved into this camp, they assumed that it was all very kind of beautiful because the Brits thought they were going to lose the war and it would be important to curry favor with the Germans. And they had a fantastic life. There was a tailor sent up from London. They had their pick of a huge library, really good food. And they were kind of, wow, this is good. They were careful not to say too much during their interrogations. But when the interrogations are over and they went back to their rooms, that's when they started talking. They started talking about the war, about the technical details of their planes, about rape, about killing. And this is everything they said was being recorded. And down in the basement of Trent Park were rotating shifts of German Jewish listeners, secret listeners, who were transcribing everything that was being said and gleaning it for useful intelligence, very important intelligence, which was actually crucial to the war effort. So I thought, this is such a good story, and I can't believe nobody really knows about it. And so I thought, one day I will write a book around it. And so when Stella Fry and Harry Fox come on the scene, we have a murder of one of the German prisoners at Trent Park. The body's found in the ground. They can't let the police know because that would threaten to blow open an extremely secret operation. But at the same time, one of the listeners has gone missing and a gun has gone missing. And they're worried that the whole operation will be blown. And so Stella is moved into the listening team to see if she can find out who the killer is. So this is the beginning of the story, and I was just, it has so many metaphors. The idea of the basement, and if you look around the basement of history, you're going to find stories. But there are real life implications too. Actually, do you want to hear about what's happening now with Trent Park?
I do. Yeah, I was absolutely. I have one of my questions was about the sort of setting and you've sort of said about it. But yeah, no, I'd love to hear like what it is now.
Very importantly, for many years after the war, it was like owned by the local council. It didn't look great. It was a slightly neglected building, and then it was bought by Berkeley Homes, who decided to turn it into luxury flats. And while they were doing this development, there was a question mark over what was going to happen to the basement. And the theory was that actually they should just rip all the listening bits out and just put in a swimming pool. But a group of people who really knew what had gone on said, look, no, this isn't okay. We need to keep this. This was a very important part of World War II history. And so eventually what's come to pass is that the basement is being kept as a museum. And from, I think, April next year, it's going to be open to the public.
Oh, so that's fantastic.
You can go and see Trent Park, which is beautiful anyhow. And you can also see in the basement, and the kind of the headphones and all the equipment. So what was interesting about this story, before I get on further to crime fiction, is that for many, many years, nobody talked about Trent Park. And then in, I think, 1985, there was a German historian who was researching in the National Archives in Britain. And he came across this cache of transcripts of what the German officers had talked about when they were being bugged. And he was shocked. He was shocked because it was far more bloodthirsty, far more sadistic and savage than he had expected. And partly because they were very high-ranking Germans, there had been a feeling in Germany that actually the more high-ranking officers would not have gone in for the kind of brutality and the sadism that maybe lower orders did. But what these transcripts showed this, they very much did. They reveled in, there were mass rapes and killings, and they talked about it in an extremely bloodthirsty way. Talked about how much they loved bombing people and watching them run away. And anyhow, so this Sonke Nietzsche, the historian, wrote a book called Soldaten, and it was published in Germany, and Germans were shocked by it. It made waves. And then it was published here. So you can read his book, and you can see what the actual transcripts say, which is just riveting. So I've used a lot of the real transcripts in the story, but when Stella goes in and has to listen to these quite shocking details. So that's part of the story, but of course it's a murder mystery as well.
Yeah.
Very importantly, it's got the word Paris in the title.
It has, yes, indeed.
And because I was fascinated by what it would be like in Paris on the eve of German invasion. So what happened in World War II was that Hitler launched a very rapid blitzkrieg, a very rapid war that went through the Low Countries, Belgium, and he took France in 6 weeks. And the French were really surprised because they'd built this thing called the Maginot Line, which was a defensive line to stop any German attack. And the Germans just went round the edge of it and attacked, and France was taken. And I thought it'd be very interesting to write about those days when the blitzkrieg has begun, but they haven't reached Paris yet. What were the French feeling and thinking? How frightening was that? And also, how frightening was it in London, knowing that there was this very powerful verdict approaching across the whole of Europe, swallowing up Europe, and with a very, very real possibility that it was going to swallow up Britain too. One of the things in lots of my other books I've always been astonished by is that within living memory, we really feared that we were going to be conquered. We were going to be subjugated and conquered. And I don't know about you, but I asked my parents about this, and they were all, they were children at the time, but they always were very blasé about it. They kind of underplayed it. Whereas today we would, very neurotic about it, but they were very sort of stiff upper lip about it. Anyhow, so in the story, there's all this feeling about the Germans are about to come, and Harry Fox, my suspended MI5 operative, really believes they're coming, and he's worried about what he'll do when they come. So I think those days are just absolutely fascinating.
No, I agree. I think the whole, I mean, I'd not heard of Trent Park before, so I sort of, like you say, Bletchley Park is. So was there the ability for you to, is there archives? Could you go and research there, or is that part of from the council? Yeah. Or
well, I've been there lots of times, but the archives aren't held there. The archives are held at Kew. But yes, of course, I've been and sort of tramped around and looked at this lovely place. And what's so interesting is before the war, when it was owned by Philip Sassoon, he was this great socialite. Every weekend he would have Charlie Chaplin, Winston Churchill, all sorts of Hollywood stars, all sorts of aristocrats would come and have a house party at Trent Park, because it's not very far away from London. And so there's loads and loads of pictures, tons of pictures of people having fun and kind of living it up. And then overnight it becomes this prison camp.
Yeah.
So it was really fascinating. It was all organised by a fascinating man called Thomas Kendrick, who was very clever. He was head of station in Vienna until the Anschluss in 1938, when the Gestapo arrested him, and he came back to Britain, and he was put in charge of working out what to do with captured prisoners when the time came. So he was in charge of the whole operation. But it's a crime too. I mean, so one of the other interesting and fun things about doing this particular series is having two protagonists instead of one.
Yeah.
I know lots of writers do that, but I'd never done that. I've always just had one key protagonist. And I really liked doing Harry Fox. I always thought, the female character will be the main character, but actually Harry Fox kind of has really grown on me. He was suspended from MI5. I had him as a watcher during the time that Edward VIII was having all these problems with Wallace Simpson. The government put a watching detail on Edward VIII and Wallace, because they were very worried that actually Wallace was potentially treasonous. This is way back in the mid 1930s, and indeed it was proved that Wallace was leaking top secret classified government documents from Edward's papers to von Ribbentrop, who was the German ambassador at the time, and was almost certainly having an affair with her. So the watching detail were a group of MI5 surveillance operatives, and Harry was one of these. And then Harry got into trouble, and the trouble was so bad that he was suspended from service. But he's a brilliant surveillance operative.
And I really liked him as a character. I like both of them actually, and I was interested that because I sort of thought in my head that that Stella would be your sort of, you know, because she's a girl and she's, you know, she's very feisty and, you know, she just, you know, she doesn't, but actually they are a really good team, although they're not a team, but they are, you know, there's that sort of dynamic, isn't there? And I'm interested that you said that he's sort of grown on you, because characters can do that, can't they? They can just sort of develop their own life, really.
This is so true. It's so true. You can come into a character. I had this with Clara because I started writing Clara in like lots of years ago. I started when she was 26 in 1933, and there are 6 books, and they go up to 1941 as the most recent one, Judgment of Stars. So she's grown and she's really grown and developed as a character, because I think if you lived in Germany, Berlin, and you watched the rise of the Nazis from right beginning all the way through, and you were living a secret life, because Clara Thynne is a British intelligence, fallen into helping British intelligence, and hides her own Jewish ancestry. And I think there's been a lot of maturing. So Clara's matured. So what I realize is that characters really do change and grow on you. So Harry, who in the first of this series, it's Midnight in Vienna, which was out last year, is about the death of a cozy detective novelist, and Harry is a big fan, but Harry's dyslexic. So I started out with Harry being dyslexic, in disgrace, a bit alcoholic, but gradually I can see that he's going to have more depth, and he has got more depth. And I think that Stella, who's, you know, well educated, speaks several languages, etc. She's going to understand that they're not as chalk and cheese as she thinks, and there's an undeniable attraction between them. But in Appointment in Paris, they both have liaisons with different people. So you know.
But that's quite fun. I imagine when you're writing a series, you've got that sort of freedom to do whatever you like with the characters, and so they can, you know, particularly I think if it's like will they, won't they sort of relationship, which sometimes they are and sometimes they're not in crime. I think it's always an interesting dynamic, isn't it? Is a pair in crime, crime fiction. Whether it's, you know, something iconic like, you know, Sherlock Holmes and Watson, or something, you know, I'm thinking of just like, well, for me, Poirot and Hastings is where the dynamic is very different.
But these two are kind of equals, actually, and they're both capable of making their deductions. And in Midnight in Vienna, Stella goes to Vienna because she's lived there. She's on the trail of a potential murderer, of a detective writer, and she goes to Vienna. And in Appointment in Paris, she goes to Paris. But in the next novel, it's going to be Harry that goes, because I think it's not fair that Stella travel. And so it's going to be Harry's turn to go, and he's going to go to Lisbon next, because Lisbon was fascinating, and Lisbon was neutral. And so when the Nazis were like occupying the whole of Europe, everybody made their way down to Portugal and Lisbon, because that was the only place you could get a ship to America. And you know, it's the only place you could get out. So everybody went there, refugees, crowned heads, and it was also swarming with spies. So it's a fun place, but that's the next book, and it's not anywhere near it.
What, when you sort of when we sort of the characters came about, how did they sort of come about in the beginning in sort of before pre Midnight in Vienna?
Midnight Vienna, I was very taken by the fact that set in 1938. In 1938, there was a huge craze, and the craze was for cozy detective fiction. So it was a point at which Agatha Christie, Nagao Marsh, Dorothy L. Sayers, these people were at their peak. The reason people, times of political turbulence, turn to cozy detective fiction is fairly obvious. They want comfort. They want a world in which everything is orderly. And I thought, wow, we're now living in this world in which kind of Richard Osman and, all sorts of very, very cozy crime.
That's a really interesting point that it's gone back to that.
Absolutely, because we feel nervous, we haven't got a view of the future, and we want some comfort. And so I thought that's very interesting. And I thought I'd have a cozy detective writer who turns out to be not very cozy after all, but he's killed, and quite by chance, Stella has been employed by him to type out a manuscript. And so that's how it starts. But it's a much deeper plot is on. So I tried to stick very much to real things that really happened, particularly with espionage. I like to put lots of real people in, and I won't mess around with where they were. They have to be at the right place. So, for example, point in Paris, Stella goes to see Noel Coward in Paris because for a brief period, Noel Coward was in charge of British propaganda in Paris. And he was in charge of, basically what he was really doing was sounding out informers and potential, for when France fell to the Nazis, as everybody would, he was in charge of finding people who could potentially be British informers. But Noel Coward also had to do some kind of propaganda, which he felt was ridiculous. And he kept coming up with these ideas like filling balloons with little Union Jacks and things and bursting over all these ludicrous propaganda things. And he was asked to disseminate some leaflets explaining to Europeans why the Nazis were bad, and it went on, and why Chamberlain wanted peace. And he said it would actually be quicker to bore them to death than have them all these wretched leaflets. He was very funny. He was the wrong person in the wrong place, but I just thought it'd be fun for Stella to go and see him. So he really was there. So I didn't like to put people in a place where they weren't.
That's interesting, isn't it? With historical fiction, that you can, sometimes you can sort of fill in the bits that weren't there, but quite often people will sort of stay true to what you do know, but the stuff that you don't know, you can then make that up.
Yeah. So I always think, you've got to keep all the kind of furniture in the same place, but you can feel down the back of the sofa, basically. You mustn't mess around with actual people where they were at the actual time, but you're free to kind of weave in between those spaces where you don't really know what happened. And so that, really, to be honest, that's been my kind of fictional technique always, actually, right from the first Clara Vine story, which was quite interesting, actually. That came about because I found out that Magda Goebbels, who was the wife of Joseph Goebbels, Nazi propaganda minister, had, until she married him, been engaged to a fervent Zionist. And she'd learnt Hebrew. She wore a little Star of David. She'd been planning to go and live with him in Palestine. Off he went. His name was Olosarov. Off he went, and he was going to try and found a state of Israel. This was in 1931. He went off, and at that time there was Palestine was under a British mandate, and he was part of a sort of plot to basically overthrow the British mandate. Off he went, leaving Magda in Germany, and Magda on her own, went to a talk by this guy called Adolf Hitler, who she thought was incredibly impressive. And, and he was very impressed by her. But Hitler, even though he's very attracted to Magda, wouldn't take it any further because he felt he needed to be married to Germany. So he introduced her to Joseph Goebbels. So she ended up marrying Goebbels. Meanwhile, Lossaroff comes back to Berlin in April 1933, walks down the street and sees in a bookshop window a wedding photo of his former girlfriend getting married to Joseph Goebbels, arch persecutor of the Jews, you know who as best man, and he is horrified, really, really horrified. But he gets in touch with Magda. That's as much as we really know happened. And all else we really know is that 3 months later, he was gunned down and murdered. What we don't know is what happened when he got in touch with Magda.
Yeah.
And so I would love to invent a fictional character who becomes a kind of go-between in this awkward situation. And that's really how Clara Vine came about. But I just love the idea of these kind of what ifs of history.
Yeah.
Where you kind of investigate the little gaps.
Well, that's the sort of thing, isn't it, with fiction as well, is that you can investigate and then, interpret that in the way that you would interpret it, because of so I mean, I think that's an absolutely fascinating bit of history that I didn't know. And I think that's the other things, isn't it, is it's like with a big subject like World War II, there's so many small pockets of history that just are hidden,
just coming up all the time. But as well as doing that, I've always, obviously because of studying history, been obsessed with the great what ifs of history. Because you see, when you look at particularly World War II, you see how easily things could have gone a different way.
Yeah.
Thus came a decision to write Widowland, which I wrote, which is an alternative history. So I wrote it under a pen name, C.J. Carey. And the what if with Widowland is, what if England, instead of going to war with Germany, had come to a kind of peace and become a German protectorate? And, people have done this many, many times in different ways. But what particularly interested me was this. There was a man called Alfred Rosenberg who was Hitler's philosopher. And Alfred Rosenberg had very fixed views about women. That was one of the things he believed, that women should live in castes, from the highest to the lowest type of women. Yeah. But another thing that Alfred Rosenberg did was, instead of burning books, which we always think of Nazis doing, he sent a little task force of scholars through all the libraries and private collections of occupied Europe to collect history books and have them rewritten to reflect the National Socialist view of what history should be. And I thought, A, that was amazing, but B, what would it be like if they came to Britain and they decided to rewrite English literature, the great classics of English literature?
Yeah.
And if you think of the great classics of English literature, what you think of are very much 19th century novels where by women, Jane Eyre, Jane Austen, very early 19th century, Wuthering Heights, the Brontes, Middlemarch. You think of these great books and they're all about women finding agency and finding independence.
Yeah.
Now the Nazis wouldn't like that because that's not what. So what they do in Widowland is they come over and they decide, look, you can't just burn all these books, but what you can do, there's too famous, things like Pride and Prejudice, what you can rewrite them a bit so that actually Lizzie Bennet is not like feisty and independent, but she learns to respect and obey her man. And, Dorothea Brooke in Middlemarch is, just understands her place. And so I thought it'd be fun to do this. And so my protagonist in Widowland is Rose, has the job of having to basically dumb down English literature.
Wow.
And in the process of that, she hasn't read anything and hardly anything. In the process of it, she obviously has a learning, she has a growth. She understands. And England has become this place that's particularly awful for women, because women have to now live in a caste, in 6 castes. The top caste is Rose's caste. They're fine. You know, they will have jobs. They get better food.
Yeah.
The bottom caste, and I took this from history. I took this from the end of World War II in Germany, where you got different rations according to what kind of woman you were. And the people who got the lowest rations were women over 50 who didn't have a man and they didn't have children because they were useless. And thus they would just get hardly any food. And they were jokingly called Friedhofsfrauen, cemetery women, because they were pointless. And so in Widowland, the Friedas, women who, over 50, no children, no men, have to live in particularly rundown, horrible areas called widowlands. But of course, if you get together a group of over 50 women, different ones, they're the ones who have nowhere further to fall. And so they foment a rebellion, and they are the heroines. So that's the story of Widowland. But to do that, I took history and I had to adjust it. So VIII and Wallace are on the throne, and it's very easy to see how different history could have been. And but it was interesting. I decided to do it under a pen name because I thought I
had no idea that you wrote that, because I remember that book being everywhere. The cover's really striking, isn't it?
The cover is great, and I did a sequel called Queen High, and the cover of that was very good as well. I just think I couldn't believe it when they came up with this cover, because it's so sort of striking and slightly threatening. But it is Orwellian, and it's I loved writing that. That was great. And I'm actually, my next book, but one, is going to be another C.J. Carey, because I'm sure other writers say this, but it's so liberating to actually sometimes depart from history.
I was going to say, is it freeing? Is it freeing to be just not Jane, somebody else?
And that was really important, that I was somebody else, because I'd always with all my historical novels, tried to be really faithful to kind of fact. You can't say Himmler was here when actually Himmler was in a different country. But it was just so much fun writing those. So that's been fun. I mean, it's writing is just brilliant, and there was nothing better. But being able to actually free yourself and write, I suppose it's fantasy really, is particularly great.
I think sort of it's interesting, isn't it, with crime, and I mean, because crime, obviously, crime does happen, and obviously there was lots of people murdered, but actually that sort of being able to invent a murder and who done it, why they did it, is a really interesting. So how do you sort of get to that point when you're writing? Do you sort of have the idea of how it's going to pan out at the end? At the beginning?
So I was married. I had my husband, who died, was called Philip Kerr. He was a great detective writer, and he in fact his series, which is called Berlin Noir, is being made by Apple into a series being filmed next year, so that's going to be great. But anyhow, so we plot all the time, and he was a brilliant plotter, and one of the things that we talk about, and I really like, is a thing called the quiet fuse, which, if you think of the Odessa file, for example, right at the beginning of the Odessa file, there's a character he's a journalist. I think he's called Peter Miller. I forgot what his name is, actually, the protagonist. And he finds a diary, and it's a diary of a kind of old Jew who's died, and but it's just got a little detail about a captain, an SS captain at the beginning, and it's an overlooked detail. You don't think anything of this detail, but then Peter Miller embarks on this great odyssey to try and find out, the great crime of the century in the Odessa file. And what you don't realize is that Forsyth has lit this fuse by this teeny weeny detail, which later you understand understand to be tremendously important and the trigger. And I always love that. I love to put a little teeny thing that you just overlook.
Yeah.
It's important. Somebody mentions something, a welter of detail, but it then becomes, that is the key. Like Rosebud, like you know, Susan Cain and Rosebud, just something that is the key that unlocks everything. I always love that stuff. You know, it's not really, I mean, obviously it's always about who killed the person and why.
Yeah.
And very much, nearly all my books start with a murder, but so too. But I know. I did stop killing young women, actually. I had a thought, because the early ones have all got women being killed at the beginning, and I thought, actually, no, I'm just going to kill men from now on.
Well, you know,
other blokes that get killed.
There has been, hasn't there? You know, there's always actually a lot. I know that other authors have said similar, because it was always the women almost sort of got killed because they were women, sort of thing. Whereas, you know, I think that there's so many other people that could be killed just rather than just being a woman, you know, just because.
Yeah. Although all the women I sort of had as murderees were, you know, I then go into their backstory. So
yes, it's not gratuitous, you know, it's just not just because they're a woman.
No, it'd never be like that. But I thought, I'm just going to kill more men from now on. And so that's what happens. And
what was oh, sorry, I was going to say, what was the most challenging part of writing An Appointment in Paris? What did you was there anything you particularly struggled with to sort of get to bring into the story? Or
weirdly, this it's slightly sort of, it's a very difficult concept to write about foreign travel. Actually, at the beginning of World War II, because it was really hard to travel, and I've really kind of fenced myself in with this series, because there were only a certain number of places you actually could travel to in Europe once the Nazi takeover had happened. And so obviously you can go to Paris until you take the boat train to Paris until May the 10th or whenever, actually June the 6th. And you can go to Lisbon, but there's not a large number of other places that are easy. So in a way, that was the biggest challenge, thinking, where can I set my kind of my destination, you know, because it's always nice to have a destination. And I was joking, Appointment in Paris, although only half the novel is in Paris, the other half is at Trent Park, and Trent Park is in Cockfosters. So I thought, am I going to call it Appointment in Paris, or am I going to call it Appointment in Cockfosters? That was an easy. That was
more glamorous.
Yeah.
Sorry to anybody who's watching who lives in Cockfosters. I'm sure it's very nice, but
great. Cockfosters beautiful, but I know. So and Lisbon was a good place. So you can go to Lisbon, but that's the major challenge. It's been the great challenge. But I like the pair, and I'm going to keep them kind of, well, you know, I'm going to keep the will they, won't they going for a bit.
Yeah. Do you when you started writing the Clara books and these, do you have an idea of how many books will be in the series, or do you just feel like you'll know when it's time to finish?
No, I feel bereft. I would like to keep writing Clara. I've only got up to 1941. And I would just, I've got a 7th one plotted out, and I would just love to keep writing Clara, and I probably will write a 7th.
Yeah.
But the trouble is I've moved publishers, so publishers don't want somebody else's backlist. That is the great trouble.
Yeah.
But I would love to keep writing Clara, because that's a character I'm very, you know, emotionally attached to. On the other hand, I'm now getting pretty emotionally attached to these two. And so I've got about 3 books plotted out now. So I can see the way ahead, which is, you know, an unusual thing in life. I mean, whether it will be the way ahead, who knows, you know, but
Well, no, and I imagine that you probably, like you said, you have that seed of an idea, so that it's likely that a seed of an idea might pop up that you might sort of think, actually, that's the way I'm going to go now.
Yeah, totally. Well, that's happened with the next CJ Carey book, which is called An Inkling, which I'm just longing to write. And it's the idea literally popped up when I was in Oxford, and I thought, oh, I could just see that story already. So that's going to be fun, but I can't talk about that too much. But no, it's very good. I mean, you know, the downside, I'm sure there's other writers or other people who write sort of watching this, and the downside we all know is, you know, the actual writing process is kind of punishing, particularly if you're, I'm an ex-journalist, and you know, being a journalist, being in a newsroom is just the best fun there is, because you're just like very busy all the time, meeting people, going to stuff, and you know, knocking out a novel. You're in your cave, you know, accompanied by my dog, who I can hear snoring. I hope nobody else can.
Oh, I didn't hear him. I couldn't hear him. So yeah,
her. She's snoring away down there. Yes. It's not being picked up, but
no.
So it's a different kind of it's a different pace of life, shall we say? But it's, you know, it's bliss. It's bliss. But
we talked about it, didn't we, just before we came on, that you were saying that you'd had your launch yesterday, and how different that sort of enjoying the sort of glamorous side of the author life, you know, in comparison.
It doesn't come around. It doesn't come around very often. So you're let out sort of once a year or something, and all the other writers, you know, come along kind of blinking into the light, and it's the most fun. It's just so, but it requires, you know, all your social energy gets used up. It was great fun, actually, and there were lots of spy writers there, lots of writers I've known a long time, and so we just writers aren't that sociable, you know, because, you know, that's not their type, but it's, you know, book launches are fun. It was really fun, but not having another one of those for a good year, so
maybe you need a year to recover from the last one. What made you sort of go down the espionage sort of thriller route? What sort of drew you to that? Was it the sort of the secrets and the sort of the things that you didn't know?
Definitely. So I think we're at a moment in time when we're really interested in espionage, and I think the reason for that is that we are hyper vigilant, because we're so aware that we're being surveilled. You know, you can't, well, maybe it's different in Devon. It is different in Devon, but in London, you're surveilled all the time. There's 300 cameras in Putney High Street. So you know that you're being surveilled. And I think that has an effect on people. They're aware of being observed, You think about how people behave differently when they're observed and when they're not observed. And I think that has a lot to do with why we're interested in spies who are hiding a secret all the time. And I got very, very interested in, when you write about World War II, you can't help but be interested in the espionage bit of it, because it was so crucial to the war effort. And human drama, humans who managed to conceal a part of themselves. We all know that everybody has a pretense and has their kind of secrets. And spies are that writ large, which is why I chose Clara Vine to be an actress, because actors are also, you know, acting a role. And she's an actress, she's a spy. They're the same role, really. But, you know, spying's fascinating, and Cold War spying even more interesting. So, you know, I'm very glad. I know lots of spy writers, and I'm so glad I don't write contemporary espionage, because it's so complicated. It changes all the time. Literally day by day, it gets more complex. It would be very hard to keep up. And, you know, everything seems dated, you know, before you finish the book. So actually the great thing about World War II espionage is, you know, it's history. We know it.
Yeah, I think that's applicable in just contemporary fiction, full stop, because contemporary crime, it's very difficult you know, to find somewhere, like you said, you're not being watched, you haven't got a phone, you haven't got a computer, you know, so you're going into that sort of cut off in a snowstorm or on a deserted island or something. You've got to really take it to the extreme to go to that locked room to be able to escape that technology, haven't you?
That's such a good point. Yeah, and you have to kind of, in this DNA evidence, etc. Yeah, contemporary. I mean, I'm probably just hiding in history. Convenience, actually.
I think a lot of people do. I think it's quite common. You know, the authors that we get on here, there is a mix. You know, there are people that, but actually, the challenge is, if you do write contemporary, is how do you avoid those things that make it very easy for people just to look it up or to know where they are or whatever.
Could attract it on the phone, all of that. Yes, so we don't have any of that, and in the 20th century, like, human intelligence was what was interesting. And you know, I love all that. I love the John le Carré stuff, the dead drops.
Yeah,
I've spent a lot of time in Berlin, and I know where they had dead drops, and you know, and watching the brush pasts and things, and that's just great. It's the human stuff that interests me much more than the tech.
Yeah.
And so that, I suppose that's why I've always had the odd spy in the ranks. I have written books without spies. I'm just trying to remember what they are, but I'm sure there have been some. and I will write non-spy novels, but you know, no, the spying is a fascinating thing.
Well, it's the people thing, isn't it? I think people read books because they want to know about things they don't know about. And so spying sort of encapsulates the sort of the human interest of, like, who are these people? Why do they do it? What do they do? And that sort of whole, you know, going into a world that, you know, probably none of us will ever experience.
Yeah, and also having to keep spies, certainly in the 20th century, where people had, you know, they had a value system. I mean, if you think of the Cambridge Five, the kind of Guy Burgess and Kim Philby, Anthony Blunt, they presented as one thing, members of the kind of upper middle class, possibly right-leaning, and they were genuinely something completely different. And they had, what interests me about Kim Philby, who's by far the most interesting of all of them, is that he had this burning belief in communism and Russian communism from 1934 onwards. And you ask why it didn't waver. He went through, he died in Moscow, you know, and you just think that's so interesting that he stuck to that, even after seeing the reality of Russian communism. But so that people's values, you know, having values, you know, nowadays you're really glad if anyone's got any values, but I don't know. I think Philby's fascinating. I kind of will write again about him. Because he deceived so many people, his best friend, all his wives, just completely deceived. I had a really interesting conversation with Nigel West, who's a spy writer, and quite a big non-fiction spy writer. And we were talking about Philby's motivations. And I said, oh, did he have a bad relationship with his dad? Because sometimes that's, you know. And he said, no, it wasn't that. He thinks his motivation was racism, in that he had an Indian ancestor, and he felt that the people in MI6 who were very snobby looked down on him because he was like not 100% racially English, and which I didn't know, but it sounds quite persuasive, actually. So there we go.
Yeah, interesting. So who inspires you, Jane? Who's inspired your writing over the years?
Well, I mean, I've been writing for, you know, like, I know everybody that's watching is also is almost somebody who's also written, but you start young, don't you? You start young. Write your novels young, they're hopeless, you've got, you know, you've got 5 in the drawer, and that applies to everybody. And I suppose Philip was a big inspiration. I'd written 2 novels by the time I met him, but I watched the reason he was an inspiration actually was because of his work ethic. Because if you are going to keep writing novels, you've got to really keep at it. And he worked so hard every day. Christmas Day, he'd be down there writing.
Wow.
I thought, oh, that is a real dedication.
Yeah.
I once had a conversation with him in which he said, and he'd written a book, hadn't really sold very well, and he was thinking of the next one, and he mentioned Iris Murdoch, who was interviewed, and the interviewer said, "How long do you leave between your novels, Miss Murdoch?" And she said, "Oh, a really long time, like 40 minutes." And Philip was like this. He would start the next day. He wrote
really? No break, no nothing, just like right on.
No break. Partly because it's a muscle, that you know, it is a muscle. And if you go away and think, I'm going to have a sabbatical for writing, I'm not going to write anything for 2 months, you almost forget how to write. It's a thing. It's got to be, I'm sure, like anything, like ballet or something, unless you're doing it rigorously, thinking about it all the time, you get out of the habit of it.
Yeah.
And it's writing is also reading. I always say this, you know, but everybody says this. You've got to be reading all the time.
Yeah.
Thinking about words and how people use them. It sounds so high-minded, and, you know, of course, you know, I don't live up to any of this, but all I'm saying is Philip was quite inspiring in this regard. And it was super useful. We would sit and talk about how.
No, I imagine so. It was,
novels, and sort of, you know, he was very good at plot, but there were things he wasn't that good at, actually. Like, he couldn't, women's minds, women's emotions were just like a closed door to him. So I would say you've got to put more women in and make the women a bit more kind of, you know, three-dimensional, and which he did. And so it was kind of very useful synergy. So I miss that a lot. But who else inspires me? I just, all my friends. I mean, I'm surrounded by lots of writers, and
you know, that can be really helpful, can't it, as well?
Yeah. But I suppose what really inspires me is just watching people work hard, because that's the truth of it. You look at somebody like J.K. Rowling and you think, oh my goodness, you know, she doesn't seem to take an hour off. How do people do this? You know. So there you go.
It's so hard work. So hard work. I mean, hard work is, you know, I know we all talk about it, but it does sort of pay off, doesn't it? You know,
it pays off. But it's a life habit, of course. Yeah, and it does. It definitely pays off. And because I remember I once interviewed Claire Bloom, who'd been married to Philip Roth, which the marriage turned horrible, and she had actually written a book about how awful he was. But when I went to interview her, she said, well, I would never have thought of writing a book, actually, but that's the one thing Philip did tell me, because I said to him, I'll never write a book. And he says, no, all you have to do is write 1,000 words a day, and then in 3 months, you will have a novel. And, well, you know, that's...
if only it was that easy.
And if you could do 1,000 words a day, 3 months, there you go, you've got a novel. And so she'd taken this advice and written this book about how awful Philip Roth was. But fun.
But probably wished he never said that.
Yeah, exactly. What was it called? I think it was called In the Doll's House. I'm trying to remember what it was called. He wrote I Married a Communist, and she wrote, I think, In the Girl. Anyhow, they were vicious. But you're just thinking really technical, you know, if I write 1,000 words a day, you know, by the end of 3 months, I'll have written nearly 100,000 words.
That is something, isn't it? Well, they do that in what's it called, in November, where you write so many words and you can have a novel at the end of the month.
Yeah, National Novel Writing. I don't know. I mean, maybe that, but also if you think of somebody like Graham Greene, who I obviously think is amazing, he would write 500 words a day, which is also, you know, he wrote tons of books. So I think that just that basic, if you can just produce those words. But having said that, I'm currently, abandoning all these high-minded things because, what really bedevils writers is social media. That's just become torture because publishers want you to, go on lots of platforms and do this horrific thing about kind of, boasting about your book. It's awful. And it takes a lot of time.
It does take a lot of time. Yeah. I mean, I blog, so I do, I write reviews and things, but it does, that does take up, and it does become more of a chore because it's like work. You're like,
it is work, and it's, the more the platforms mushroom, and so I've made a little stand. I'm not on TikTok, but that sounds pathetic, really. But all the other platforms, and I'm also not going to write a Substack. This is the new instrument of torture. Substack, because anyone can set one up, and you hope that people will pay £5 a month, but you have to write great long pieces all the time, unpaid, and it doesn't, that doesn't sound fun. So I'm not going to do that. but no, it's relentless, absolutely relentless. And something like this is wonderful because it's just so brilliant to talk about, the techniques of writing and things. But having to kind of post, it's with British, kind of like English people are a bit more kind of, they're brought up not to kind of boast, aren't they?
No, I know what you mean. It's like, it's sort of like not blowing your own, hide your light under a bushel sort of thing.
Nobody's going to be looking at you. Nobody wants to hear what you have to say. All that sort of stuff. So having to do all the social media is quite hard. And you do see people that do it very effectively who are clever and manage not to come over as obnoxious, which is great.
Yeah,
it's a conundrum.
I'm just looking that we're sort of coming up to the end of the hour. What's you mentioned that there's your next book. Are you able to sort of say anything about the next book that you're writing, or is it secret?
Well, actually, so the next in the Fox and Fry series is going to be Last Night in Lisbon. But before I write, well, I have started writing that, but before I finish that, I'm writing a standalone. That is, I can't say anything about it at the moment. I kind of, which is a real pain because it's a great idea. It just came to me and I thought, oh, that sounds good. But it's got spies. It's got spies in it. Standalone, set in 1953, and it's a reimagining of a very famous English novel. But I've moved it to Long Island in 1953. Anyhow, I'm really enjoying writing that.
Oh, that sounds really interesting. Yeah,
that's what I'm doing right now.
And have you read anything recently that you'd like to recommend to us?
Yes, I would love to recommend really a truly brilliant book. It is right here. Hold on, I've got it. It's this. Actually, sorry, this is the proof. It's by somebody called I.S. Berry, and it's called The Peacock and the Sparrow. She is a former CIA operative who's turned writer, and it's set in 1980s Bahrain, and it's got a burnt out CIA operative called Shane, who's it's her debut. It's won every award there is, and it's just, her hero is Graham Greene. It's like reading a Graham Greene novel. It's superb. She's Publishers Weekly, outstanding, echoes of Le Carré and Graham Greene. Sensational novel, winner of the International Thriller Writers Award, best first novel. I hasten to say I haven't met her, but I'm just so blown away by this novel. I think,
wow, that's amazing. Yeah,
Peacock and the Sparrow, and she is great, but she's American, so we won't be seeing much of her.
No,
but I really recommend that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, sorry.
Someone here though, her name is Ilana Berry, and she's extremely nice and personable. I'm sure she'd come on here.
Oh, lovely. Oh yeah, we'll have to speak to see if we can find out who her publishers are.
Yeah, well, they are, I can probably tell you afterwards, actually.
Okay. Brilliant. Thank you. Well, thank you, Jane. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. And I meant to say, actually, that I really love the covers of your books as well, because I love, they're beautiful. They're really atmospheric, and yeah, I just think they're just you just want to sort of
focus to be able to come up with that, which is also very stunning, and then move on to that. I think you know, the guys that do this, well, they're two different people, but they're brilliant.
Yeah, really gifted. Yeah.
No, the Paris one is marvelous.
Thank you, everybody.
People read it.
Yeah, no, I'm sure they will. And I'm going to read Midnight in Vienna now, because I'm really intrigued about the whole sort of, I love sort of Agatha Christie, that sort of cozy crime writer. So I'm sort of
Dorothy Sayers in it. She's
brilliant.
Oh, good. Oh, well, thank you so much, Karen. That's been really fantastic. I really enjoyed that.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and catch up with us again soon. Thank you.